The audience had no idea what was coming. They had shown up expecting light conversation and maybe a few laughs. But what they witnessed instead would become one of the most talked about moments in live television all year. Dwayne Johnson walked onto the set of The View with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced louder rooms than this. He smiled, waved, and took his seat at the curved panel alongside the hosts. The applause was steady, even warm. And for a moment, everything felt predictable. Then the questions began. At first, it was about his upcoming film. He spoke with ease, grateful to be promoting something he believed in. But then the mood shifted. One of the co-hosts leaned in, holding a note card she hadn't yet read aloud. "There's been a lot of talk," she began, "about celebrities staying quiet on certain issues. And Dwayne, you've faced criticism for not taking a stronger public stance on some of the things happening right now, especially from voices like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What do you say to that?" There was a beat of stillness. Johnson adjusted his watch. The audience leaned forward without meaning to. "I think people underestimate how much I care," Johnson said, calmly. "Just because I don't post everything I believe on social media doesn't mean I don't have beliefs." It wasn't defensive, but it wasn't passive either. Moments later, AOC was introduced as a surprise guest panelist. That was the moment everything changed. She entered the stage with professionalism, but with unmistakable purpose. She greeted the panel with a nod and took the open seat directly beside Johnson. "Thank you for having me," Ocasio-Cortez said. "And thank you, Dwayne, for being willing to have this conversation publicly." Johnson smiled faintly, sensing what was coming. AOC didn't waste time. "I want to speak plainly," she said. "You have one of the largest platforms in the country. When people who admire you see you staying silent on injustice, it sends a message. Whether you intend to or not, it gives cover to the status quo." Johnson didn't flinch, but his tone shifted. "I didn't come here to argue," he said. "But I think there's a real danger in assuming silence equals complicity. Sometimes people are quiet because they're still figuring out the right way to help. And that's what I've always tried to do." The tension was quiet, but unmistakable. "That's fair," AOC replied. "But silence from power never lands as neutral. You may be figuring things out, but people out there, people without your money, your reach, your protection, they don't have time for that. They're living it in real time." The audience was silent now. Johnson nodded slowly. "You're right that I have privilege. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I'm not a politician. I didn't sign up to speak on every issue. I signed up to do work that inspires people. And I think there's value in that too." Ocasio-Cortez folded her hands. "I don't doubt your heart," she said. "But this moment in history doesn't need just inspiration. It needs accountability. And choosing not to use your voice doesn't mean you're neutral. It means others will speak for you. And that's dangerous." The host tried to steer the conversation back to Johnson's movie, but it was too late. Something deeper had already begun. Johnson turned slightly toward Ocasio-Cortez. "I respect what you're saying," he said. "But I've seen what happens when people like me speak up. It gets twisted. It gets politicized. And people I care about get hurt. My job is to protect them too." AOC's expression softened, but only slightly. "I get that. I do," she said. "But the people who follow you, who see you as more than just an actor, they're not asking you to pick a side in a political fight. They're asking you to acknowledge that injustice exists and that it matters to you." A long pause followed. This wasn't a fight, but it wasn't a conversation either. It was a test. Johnson looked out at the audience, then back at the table. "My father taught me that strength isn't just about muscle," he said quietly. "It's about staying calm when everything around you wants a reaction. That's how I've tried to live. Not reactive, not performative, just solid." AOC didn't look away. "Strength is also telling the truth when it's uncomfortable," she said. "Especially when it costs you something." The room felt colder now. One of the producers stepped into the wings, whispering into a headset. The cameras were still rolling, but behind the scenes, discomfort was building. The show had gone off script. Then came the final moment that nobody saw coming. During the next segment break, a senior producer approached Johnson quietly. No argument. No raised voices. Just a subtle change in tone. When the show returned from commercial, Johnson's seat was empty. No explanation was given, no statement made, but everyone watching knew something real had just happened. And it wasn't about politics. It was about the risk of standing still in a moment that demands movement. It was about what happens when silence stops being safe and starts being seen. It was about two people who both believed in integrity, but saw the path to it differently. And now, the audience was left with the only thing television can never fully explain: the feeling that someone told the truth and someone else wasn't ready for it. By the time Dwayne Johnson left the stage, the studio's energy had shifted completely. What had started as entertainment now felt like history: messy, unscripted, and charged with something nobody could quite name. The hosts tried to move on. They introduced a segment about small business grants, then pivoted to a light conversation about favorite summer recipes. But nothing landed. The audience wasn't with them anymore. Something real had happened, and everyone could feel it. Backstage, Johnson removed his microphone without a word. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply nodded to the producer who had delivered the request and began walking quietly down the corridor toward the exit. A staffer offered to call a car. Johnson declined. Meanwhile, AOC remained at the table. Her face was composed, but not triumphant. She hadn't come to provoke a moment like this. But now that it had happened, she wasn't going to pretend it hadn't meant something. The next segment was cut short. Commercials ran longer than planned. When the show finally returned, Joy Behar tried to reset the tone. "Well," she said with a strained smile, "it's been quite a morning." A few audience members laughed, but most stayed quiet. Then Sunny Hostin spoke. "We just had a very honest moment," she said carefully. "And whether you agree with what was said or not, I think we all felt the weight of it. Sometimes, these conversations reveal more than they resolve." AOC nodded slightly, but said nothing. That evening, clips of the exchange began circulating online. Headlines were fast and shallow. Dwayne Johnson storms off set. AOC confronts The Rock live on TV. But the people who had watched the full episode knew better. There had been no storm, no theatrics, just two people sitting across from each other, neither willing to back down. By midnight, the internet had split into factions. Some said Johnson was right to protect his space, to resist being baited into political theater. Others argued that silence in the face of injustice wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. But somewhere deeper than the noise, a quieter conversation had begun. What do we owe each other when our voices carry weight? What does it mean to be respected if you're never challenged? And who decides when someone has said enough or not nearly enough? The next morning, The View issued a brief statement. It said that due to scheduling changes, Dwayne Johnson had departed the taping early. It thanked him for his time and professionalism. But it said nothing about the conversation itself. Dwayne Johnson remained silent. For 3 full days, he posted nothing on social media. No cryptic messages. No behind-the-scenes photos. No quotes about growth or integrity. And then, without warning, he uploaded a single video. It was not a statement. It was not polished. It was a phone camera set on a kitchen counter. And it began like this. "Hey," Johnson said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I think maybe some of you deserve more from me than what you got." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't apologize for walking off. But he also didn't pretend the moment hadn't shaken something loose in him. "I've always believed in using my platform to inspire," he said. "But I think I've confused inspiration with comfort. And the truth is, sometimes the most honest thing you can do is make people uncomfortable, including yourself." He paused, hands folded. "I'm not a politician," he said. "But I'm a father. I'm a son. I'm a citizen. And I know that means I don't get to sit this one out forever." He didn't mention AOC by name. But he didn't have to. Conversations like that aren't easy. "But they matter," he said. "So no, I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I wasn't ready to respond with the depth that moment deserved. And I don't believe in pretending." The video ended there. No hashtags. No call to action. Just a moment of stillness. Back at The View, the mood had settled, but not returned to normal. Viewers had noticed. The ratings spike from the episode had drawn attention. Producers met behind closed doors. Some wanted to invite Johnson back. Others warned it would be seen as backtracking. But AOC, she didn't gloat. She didn't post. She let the silence speak for itself. Because sometimes, silence is not an escape. It's a reckoning. 3 weeks passed. The moment faded from headlines, but it didn't fade from people's memory. It lingered in smaller places. In quiet conversations. In dinner tables and classrooms. In studios where producers asked, behind closed doors, if their shows could handle that kind of honesty. Nobody forgot what happened. But more importantly, nobody forgot how it felt. Dwayne Johnson didn't disappear. But something in him had shifted. Not a change in brand or image. A change in posture. He stopped deflecting questions he once laughed off. In a roundtable interview promoting his new film, a journalist asked whether celebrities had a duty to speak on social issues. Johnson didn't blink. "I think we all do," he said. "Especially when staying silent helps no one but yourself." He wasn't reading from a script. The words landed with weight because they came from somewhere lived, not written. Meanwhile, The View moved on. The next week brought new guests, new headlines, new outrage. But the audience was different now. Viewers wrote in, asking for more of what that moment gave them. Not scandal, not confrontation, clarity. And when AOC returned 2 weeks later, they were listening more carefully. She didn't bring it up. Not directly. But in the middle of a conversation about civic responsibility, she said something that stopped the table cold. "Sometimes people expect you to speak for others, when you're still trying to find your own words," she said. But silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the beginning of understanding. The studio went still. Nobody interrupted. That night, Dwayne Johnson posted one more video. Just a sentence. "No hard feelings," he said. "Only new responsibilities." He smiled. It wasn't for the camera. It was for something else. In the weeks that followed, a subtle but unmistakable shift began. Johnson accepted an invitation to speak at a student-led summit on justice and media. He didn't give a speech. He held a conversation. He asked questions more than he answered them. And when someone asked what changed him, he said this: "I stopped worrying about saying the right thing and started worrying about meaning what I say." The audience stood, not because he was famous, but because he was real. That was the thing nobody could take back. The rawness of that moment on The View had torn something open, and in its place, something deeper had begun to grow. Not certainty, but courage. Not performance, but presence. And the question now wasn't whether Johnson would speak again. The question was, what would the rest of us do now that we had seen someone choose growth in real time? Because when people stop walking away from hard conversations, something strange happens. Others start walking toward them. The next time Dwayne Johnson was invited onto live television, it was a different kind of show. There was no cheering audience, no cue cards, no panel of hosts waiting to interrupt. It was a small studio in Washington, D.C., a discussion on civic leadership hosted by a public affairs nonprofit. No teleprompters, just a chair, a glass of water, and a simple question asked directly by a young moderator. "What do you think changed the most about you in the past year?" Dwayne Johnson didn't answer immediately. He looked down for a long moment, like he was scanning through memories before choosing the right one. Then he looked up. "I used to think strength was about being unshakable," he said. "But I think it's actually about being willing to be changed by what's true." The moderator nodded slowly. "You're referring to the moment on The View?" Johnson didn't flinch. "Yes." A clip from that show had been watched over 50 million times. But what stayed with people wasn't the confrontation. It was the stillness after it. The moment where Johnson had to decide who he was going to be when the applause stopped. He had not returned to The View. Not because of bitterness, but because growth sometimes requires leaving behind the places where you were last misunderstood. But what neither Johnson nor AOC had expected was what came next. Months after their clash, their teams quietly reached out to one another. No media, no headlines, just two people meeting behind the scenes in a quiet office near Capitol Hill. They talked for over 3 hours, not about politics, but about platform, responsibility, and how being heard isn't the same as being understood. They didn't walk away as friends. They walked away as something else, as proof that disagreement doesn't have to destroy dialogue, that standing your ground doesn't mean refusing to listen, and that dignity, when held tightly in the middle of conflict, has the power to soften even the harshest assumptions. In the end, Johnson didn't become more political. He became more personal. He began choosing interviews that asked harder questions. He stopped avoiding topics he used to deflect with charm. And more than anything, he started naming the things that once felt too big to hold on camera, like doubt, like regret, like responsibility that doesn't go away when the cameras turn off. AOC, for her part, never referenced the moment publicly again. But in one televised town hall, a college student asked what she would say to someone who believes celebrity voices don't belong in serious conversations. She paused, then said, "I'd rather someone wrestle with their beliefs in front of the world than stay quiet to protect their image." It takes courage to think out loud. The room fell silent. And somewhere far away, in a studio that had once tried to manufacture conflict, a producer watched the clip and wondered what might have happened if the goal had been understanding all along. Because what started as a media moment had become something else entirely. Not a scandal, not a stunt, but a story about a man who walked into a room thinking strength meant control, and walked out knowing that real strength begins where ego ends. And the audience? They didn't forget. Because deep down, we don't remember people for how well they win arguments. We remember them for how bravely they face themselves.